Good time of day, my chess friends here on the Internet Chess Club. This is Grandmaster Alex Yermolinsky. Well, I'm back to my usual tricks again, right? We're gonna be talking rook endgames. And the game that made me do this was a game I played 2 days ago, YKZ tournament, a premier game between two of the good time of day, my chess friends here on the Internet Chess Club. This is Grandmaster Alex Yermolinsky. Well, I'm back to my usual tricks again, right? We're gonna be talking rook endgames. Okay, I got it. Yeah. The game between Anish Giri and Giri-Caruana. These are the two guys we mostly look at when we think who's gonna challenge Magnus Carlsen. Both of them are participants of the upcoming candidates tournament in Moscow. And as I said, these two, along with, of course, Hikaru Nakamura, the people we think that have the best chance to win the tournament. And also, once they won the tournament, better chance in challenging Magnus Carlsen in that match. Well, if we listen to what Magnus is saying, and he gave this interview to a Dutch newspaper during the tournament, and he stated now in more elaborate terms that how he sees a future of World Championship, and he seemed to be pretty adamant about it, that the matches as he played against Anand already twice, and he's going to be playing this year, thing of the past. And so perhaps we're going to see this year maybe the last traditional World Championship match. And of course we want to see it very interesting and very competitive. That is for sure. And I'm thinking, alright, I was thinking while watching this game, well, this is one of the latest rehearsals, if you say so, before the big show in Moscow. And the game itself did not disappoint me. I went through it from move one to the end, and most of the time, even if I was able to spot some mistakes in the opening and the middle game, I kind of understood that a lot of good moves also were played by both players, by Anish and Fabiana. So it wasn't until I got to the end game, rather from this point on, that I see on the board. That's after 50 moves of play. That's when I became disappointed. Now, before you write it off as a usual grumbling guy now with analytical tools, be it time in my hands and a chess engine and all that, before you do this, granted, you don't have to tell me this. I've been in this situation as a practical player, and sometimes indeed during the game you just don't perform up to the level of the position requires, or even up to your own ability. But nonetheless, I started thinking about how these guys approach this very important final stage of the game, the end game. And I looked at time management, and I looked at how they consider their options, and how they think in this. And I can't hide my disappointment on this. All right, anyone there to chat with me? Guys, say something, eh? Okay, I'll be patient. Another thing before I go to chess moves. I read this interview. It recently appeared in some Russian press. Obviously, I read it on the internet. Interview with Sergei Dalmatov. Dalmatov obviously is part of the great duo of pupils of Mark Dvoretsky's, Yusupov and Dalmatov. A player of my generation. I played him a lot when we were young, and he was very good. He was way better than me. And then he started off his chess career in the 20s as is one of the best players and very well. And then he kind of started playing less. He had some health issues he briefly touches on. But anyway, he became a coach early, and he coached on a very high level. He was the coach of the Russian Olympic team, and he talks about this in the interview. But one part that I particularly found very interesting is when he talks about how they used to work on chess with Dvoretsky. And he says, of course, before computers, we had to get everywhere on our own. And particularly we paid a lot of attention to the endgame, because in the middle game, there are so many possibilities that you can hardly find the truth. You're just looking maybe for the most optimal way to play in a practical game situation. But when you look at the endgame, then you should be able to see it all, and you should be able to see through. And this is how you get better at chess. And he actually didn't spare any words. He sounded pretty harsh in his evaluation of modern handling of the endgame. We understand, of course, the games cannot be adjourned; they have to be played to conclusion, and there is also time constraints. But anyway, I want to apply what Dalmatov said. Although I was never a pupil of Dvoretsky, I was actually on the other side. Everywhere I was as a player, and I faced Dvoretsky students, and as a coach, in my experiences over there, well, I coached people basically who played against Dvoretsky students. But well, being on the other side, that doesn't mean that I don't have appreciation for the approach to this. So I will try to kind of follow it this way during this presentation. All right, now eyes to the board. This is the position. Now, what do we have here? 3 on 2, extra pawn, a passed pawn, pawns on the opposite sides of the board, and all that. Now, activity of the rooks, of course, as we know from games of Akiba Rubinstein, is the number one thing there. So white has this rook on the a5, and it ties down the black rook to the pawn on a5. So black is looking to advance his king and the pawn in the middle to the point when he can abandon this pawn and try to promote his e-pawn or win the pawn on h3. Now, the resulting situations are not going to be clear, because if there is anything that is not clear in those rook endgames, even to a skillful, experienced player, is those 2 against 1 positions when then all the pawns are passed pawns. Well, there is a lot of volatility there. There are a lot of different things, and that's what both players are looking at. Now, first we go through the moves. So Anish plays rook a8. So that's a typical move, and that's what every player, including every Russian schoolboy, has to know about rook endgames. That the rook has the ability to attack the opponent's king and pawns from behind, also keeping maximum checking distance. Okay, that's going to be the checking distance from the opponent's king. So this is the kind of move that we taught to play, and Anish played it without much thinking. Now the continuation of game went as follows: e4, and now white decides that he cannot wait for black to further improve his position. Now, the further improvement could be moving the king this way. So if we start going for these checks, then we may be able to separate the black king from the e-pawn, but we may not be able to do so at the same time, like this move. The rook comes to d5. Now notice how the black rook protects all both pawns over there, and now the black king can go forward to d3 and then support the e-pawn going forward. Black also has another plan, which would be to send the king over to capture the a4 pawn while keeping the rook on the 5th. Now, while trading your central pawn for a flank pawn may not be a most traditional way to play those rook endgames, it's still quite a possibility. So I'm looking at this line. Like, for example, if white plays this, now comes this check, then even in this position, this comes into consideration. Now you go after that pawn, maybe with the rook, takes over there, and now black can play even king g2. Now the rook is going to be able to protect the king from checks, from both checks from the side should white move the king away. Then I bet I play rook f5. I mean, maybe even king g2 or king g3, I'm not sure about, but no. So basically white may be able to defend with his king immediately on the path of the e-pawn. But that way he allows the black king to either go this way or go that way. Now, how do people react to this? In experienced players and in rook endgames, they look for counterplay immediately. Alright, that's what Anish did. So when e4 was played, he played king e3. Now, he played quickly. Maybe the reason he played quickly because he thought that his position was lost, and he was just trying to create practical difficulties for Caruana. Playing quicker, not giving him a chance to sit there and calculate variations on Giri's time. And also just part of this is always a psychological warfare. Part of this always that you sit there and then you don't give him any kind of encouragement by spending a lot of time, because then he would think, all right, so he doesn't see the way out, so I must be doing things right. Okay, all that, here I can't really argue with this, so I just want to look at the moves. So I got to this point, and now black played the king forward, rook takes pawn, and here came the moment when all the commentators and armed with chess engines, rightfully so, criticized the move rook takes h5, and well, they had another suggestion, because once this pawn is taken, according to the engines, white now reaches a draw. Right by one move, basically. No moves to spare, what I meant to say. Okay, so let me look at my analysis and see. Yeah. He went rook h1. Now, what is white trying to do? White is trying to move, of course, his a-pawn forward. Now, then black gets behind the a-pawn with his rook. Let's see what would have happened if he did it right away. The problem is that the black pawns obviously are split and they're not that far advanced, meaning that white is going to give a check. King g3 is going to save his a-pawn, and then his strategy is going to be attack one pawn, the black king goes over there, and attack the other pawn. Now, once he takes one of the pawns, then he can give up the rook for the remaining black pawn and make a draw with his a-pawn and the king. Now, checks will continue. It's always useful to drive the opponent's king in front of his pawn. Oh, that's not accurate. Check, king e2. Now you play this. He takes, you take. There, we get behind this, we go a5, that. And forward. King b5. Well, it's one tempo short. We can't win. Now, if the king already was on d5, then you give this check from behind. Force him to go to the a file and save the game. But it's too late to do this here. That's already a7. And in this position, there is no king c6 because queens with check. Well, so it's almost like this endgame was played out to its logical conclusion. This is how it looks from just a cursory look. Both players, they played reasonable moves, and no well, it just turned out to be a draw. Then what do? You spread your hands, and then you say, no well, rook endgames are always drawn. Actually, let's go to game continuation the way it went. It was played rook h1, now a5. So he first moves the h pawn forward. Now white pushes that pawn, and he actually came all the way to a7. Now that's another method to draw here, because the problem now is for the for black is that they also one tempo short. The king comes to b6, protecting the a7 pawn. And now if h2, the rook will come over, threatening to take on the next move. So, instead Fabiana gave check, we came back, and then I agreed to a draw. Okay. So, first thing for us to do is to go back to the critical moment of the game, as it was pointed out by all commentators, and see what happens after this move. Already, we're not sure how white should proceed against it. Well, he can try the same plan that he tried in the game. And we wonder how black is going to play for a win, because now, well, the white pawn is on h3, so he didn't create this passer. And so what's the deal about it? But the deal is, however, that after king b4, black has this move and gains some time. It's impossible to take because e2 and then the pawn queens. So the rook has to go over there. And now it's black's turn. Well, one thing there that I did say that you gotta stay behind the a pawn. But if you think of what's happening when you stay behind the a pawn, your rook does one job. Well, that's stopping the a pawn. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't shield your king from checks. In fact, well, there is a different method similar to this Vancouver method that we use to make a draw in some of those endgames. So the method is attacking the pawn from the side. Now this is how it's accomplished. The rook goes to d3, and well, the threat, of course, is e2. And then you put the rook on e3. So a5 loses immediately. Because after that, black can use this rook. Effectively, ending the checks. So checks had to start, a little sooner. And they do this. King over there. Okay. So then white does this, and that's the rook return. Now the king's driven in front of the pawn, and white will push his pawn forward, right? What's happening in this situation is that black will be able, white will be able, of course, to get the black rook for his a pawn, but in the end he's gonna be hopelessly lost, because once the rooks are traded for pawns, the black king is much closer to the h pawns. So go there and grab that pawn and secure the promotion of the h5 pawn way before white can return with his king. Alright, are we all clear on this so far? Okay, I hope so. It's not really that complicated. Now, there is one attempt in this position to eliminate the h5 pawn, so, with this attack. So once you eliminate this pawn, then you can give up the rook, of course, and make a draw with your a pawn. It comes just a little bit short. e2, there. Yeah. The rook is 7. Okay, let me... yeah. So this is how the position of the black rook becomes more effective. Because it stands behind the pawn now and the king can come out. Such as in this line. Then queen and the pawn, and now black is going to be in time. Okay, let me double check my analysis briefly. No, well, that actually this line is. In some way, you say it's not easy, but that's maybe the reason why Rook a3 wasn't played by Caruana. So he preferred to go for the line that he could easily understand. The only problem was that line led to a draw. So they almost like walked together through this whole endgame, rather than being opponents and trying to make things difficult for one another. They kind of went to the most obvious way of playing, and then in the end it wasn't enough. Yeah, here I'm making a mistake actually, according to my analysis. Well, the problem with rook b5 is this check, because now black has time to eliminate the a4 pawn, because white just can't go back to b3 to protect it, because then his rook cannot return. King e3, followed by queen. Now, you may say that rook a3 is a way more difficult move to play based on that line alone. You're not taking the pawn on h3, so you're not playing the moves that would give you the easier to understand winning plan. But that's what it is about. in such situations. You have to overcome those mental difficulties and then try to look for not for just most logical, but also for best moves. He had time. He had loads of time here. It just all started at move 50. Now, so once again, we go through this. So now, how does it go? So king b4, pawn forward. Now he goes over there. Now the rook has to come to d3. Check, king over there. King to c4 to force the rook away from the third rank. And now rook d7. So a bunch of checks, or rather this, doesn't matter. Forcing the king to e1. Now what happens if white brings the king back? Then comes this. Now that's pretty standard winning method, including that that involves this bridge building on the 5th rank. The white pawn didn't manage to go far enough. Therefore, the black king will come out now and eventually will reach e4, and then the check will be stopped with rook e5. So this is a part of basic endgame theory, so that obviously is very easily understood. Okay, if it was only for this line, then I believe that Caruana would have found it. But there was also this. Okay. So white is giving up that pawn. And then it goes king c3. Now we have now a different situation, but the one that I'm more familiar with, because I had a game against Grandmaster Jael Latier years ago. Actually, I think I included it in one of my videos, but it's always useful to go over it again. So let me just totally switch. Okay, we memorize this position. Let me totally switch to my game with Latier. Okay, the e pawn is going to be fighting against the g pawn. Now in this position I played... Okay, hang on a second, I want to get my analysis there going. In this position white played the right move, stopping the b pawn. And I had a hard time getting my e pawn to move forward, because if I would bring the king closer, say if I play king f2 here, trying to answer capture on b3 with this quick advance of the pawn, then on king f2, of course, white can give this check and then return. So I played the main line that I thought I had to play. I played this and then gave this check, and then went king f3. Now the game was... At that moment, it entered mutual time trouble, particularly my opponent, Grandmaster Latier, was really low on time. So he did this. Anish Giri's move, right? You always move your rook to maximum checking distance. Alright, great. I went check. Now he went back. Actually, calculation proved that he could have done this. He probably was afraid of this, but then he first gives check and then goes behind the pawn. protecting it. And now black cannot come out with the king because the check would force the king to come back. And otherwise white only has a couple moves to play before he connects his rook with the pawn and he can safely give up the rook for the e-pawn. Alright, granted, king c3 was a mistake. It's not a losing mistake though. Look what I did. Rook d6. Now that's how the rook should do in Vancouver relation to the opponent's pawn, and also to be able to either support your e-pawn or shield the king from checks. I sort of understood this, but I wasn't able to execute it exactly in this endgame. So Lattier sees that he cannot advance his pawn and he plays the most obvious move. Here after the check he plays his rook to h8. That's what we want to do, we want to support this pawn going forward. And some, after playing e3 and h6, I didn't quite get it how to win this, so I played a bad move. He returned and I returned. And then h7. Now this is the decisive error, and finally I played the move rook f7, followed by king f2 and moving the pawn forward. So at this moment my opponent resigned. Now even the last move was a mistake of his, to play h7. If he had just gotten this rook out, well, there would be a draw. So preventing that rook from doing two jobs, shielding the king from checks and stopping the h-pawn, all could be easily accomplished by just one move, rook f8. Now, when I analyzed this endgame, that's my endgame with Lattier a long time ago, I realized that this whole thing was absolutely unnecessary. And all I had to do in this position is just to play rook f6. Okay, let's look at this. The passive defense. You keep your rook in the Vancouver position. Once he moves forward, you maintain it. No, that's a theoretical win. Another thing is that once this exchange is accomplished, so he must come out with the rook, then white doesn't have this usual defense with the checks from the other side because the rook is on the short side, okay, in relation to this pawn. This is a longer area on the board than this one. So in order to make a draw, you have to have it all reversed. You have to have your king on g2 and the rook from the a file. And he's not getting there. So that part I understood very well even during the game. Slippery rook endgames, what do you think? Well, I sleep too here, so this would be a winning move. One last thing here to check is the move king d4, because white king is trying to cross over and help the pawn. And once again, that importance of the rook on the f file will be shown. In this line, it's this, there, and now rook f3. Not allowing the white king to cross over and help the h pawn. And what to do? The e pawn is going forward, and rook a8. e2. Well, just queen on the next move, and then round up the h-pawn. Alright, so this was my endgame with Lattier, so now I'll go back to what we're studying. That game was played only 3 days ago. So this was absolutely critical in this position. After rook takes a5, to go behind the pawn. So once again, we're looking rook takes there and there. Okay, how are we gonna apply this knowledge? Now, first we need to make sure that the king is not going to get in front of the pawn. And, in the meantime, we realize we cannot play e3 on account of this check. So first reaction is to play this move rook a2. Seems like black has a lot of time to spare, because if he so let's look at some lines here. h4, right? e3, rook h8, king f3, check. You already know the right move here. Put the rook on the 6th. And now gradually. Well, we need to remember that when we reach this position, and that's the winning plan, right? To play rook f7 next. It's important already to have the king and pawn already advanced to the max. So rook f7 is next, followed by king f2. It's not pure calculation. Here, I totally disagree with you. Now, well, it becomes pure calculation once you know the methods, you know. And then Caruana gave me absolutely no indication that he had any idea of this Vancouver type of attack on the opponent's passed pawn. All he tried to do, is in the game to put the rook behind the pawn. Now, you put in this position the black rook on h1, he plays king c2, and you may agree to a draw. No indication, absolutely none whatsoever, that rook d3 was not played. Well, yeah, it looks correct to have the rook on h1, but no, it's not correct, because you're not creating a shelter for your king. The rook has to do Vancouver style from the side. Now, as we look at this, again, so rook a2, h4, e3, rook h8, king f3, rook f8 check. Once again, this is the ticket. This is the move to play. Now, if he does this, then you can hide behind his king. That's always very effective. Now, that's instant win. Well, the king simply cannot cross over the e file and come to help the pawn. I'm not going in this position to play king d1. I don't think so. Because then you give up and then you go king f5. I think that's way more effective to play this move. Because I already secured the win of your rook for my pawn. You cannot come king f3 because now I give check and trade rooks and queen. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to grab the h5 pawn and then I'm going to go king d1 and queen. Obviously, this method can only work if the white king is here in no man's land. But that's exactly what happened in both games. I'm showing to you my old game with Latier and this important variation from the Giri-Caruana game. Well, a lot is said about well, how much time modern players have to spend studying the openings. Well, then, and they obviously derive a lot of benefit from this, you know, as occasional entrants into the top level tournaments discover when they come out and they over there every once in a while get a chance to play against Giri and Caruana and Nakamura and Aronian and all these top guys. They simply don't have any openings to play these guys. Well, but all the same, the game is not decided in the opening. It may be set on a good course, maybe an optimal course in the opening, but ultimately it has to be decided in positions like this. And it's no matter. It's almost if you say, like, suppose if you look at some grandmasters who play open tournaments in the United States, well, yeah, truth to tell, they will probably win a lot of games against the opposition below 2200 simply because they can, they can just get a winning position practically out of the opening or quickly checkmate them in the middle game. But once the level of the opposition becomes higher, you know, then the game is going to be tougher and they're going to be longer, and ultimately without considerable skills in the end game, grandmasters would not be able to maintain their lead in the results and in rating. Well, Rubinstein laid down important groundwork. Well, actually, most of Rubinstein's endgames, they're about the activity of the rooks. You know, I did a series of videos on this, and I realized that well, he didn't have that many examples of precise handling of situations like this. Maybe if he had a chance, well, most likely he would have. But at this moment, his advantage over other players was so great that he would simply put their opponents in very bad situations, in passive situations, and win basically without getting into this kind of stuff. Now, already, Giri, as was shown by the move Rook A8, the first move that started this endgame, and this, the way he tried to activate his king coming through to the center and queen side. Obviously, he wasn't going down quietly, but no, well, that's why something like this was required. But we know more now. Okay, this is the position. E3, right? You know what? Black doesn't win here. White can make a draw. But he can only make a draw if he really understands, well, how to play those endgames with one pawn each. And he has to fight against the Vancouver method. What do you say if I told you that Rook H6, as opposed to Rook H8, makes a draw here? Simply because I'm taking away the 6th rank. Alright, let me show my variations in support of that. Okay, so what do? You go E2, right? I play this here. Now, I can't play H5 yet, because you're simply gonna go Rook there and then you're gonna queen. So of course I have to force your king in front of the pawn. So that can be accomplished by this move, because black now doesn't have anything better than go king f1. How about this? The same thing that Latier missed, and you get to cross over. The reason is that once the king comes out, there is that check. And this is and this is not in black's best interest either, because after this move, the white king already connected with the h pawn, and you go e1, and that's an easy draw here. Just go h5. All right. So in this case, we may question how black played it. He played e2 too soon, and that allowed the white king to become a factor here. Okay, let's try with king f3. Now check there. So the king is forced in front of the pawn, and now we do this, And interestingly enough, there are no other options for black but to go behind the pawn. And once you go behind the pawn, you can't win. Now, the importance of having this rook on the 6th. You do need some checking distance there. If you had that pawn and rook on the 5th, you would have lost. I will show it to you. But now, what is black to do? Well, think about it. Any time he thinks of using his rook to shield the king, then after the trade, this pawn is just advanced enough to make a draw. Now you go to the 7th, he queens and you queen. Just make sure you're not with your king on b4 on some bad square where you get under the check, or maybe where you get squared in the end. If the king is on a normal square, some b2 or b3, then you make a draw. So basically, you don't even need to advance your pawn beyond the 6th rank. Once it's on the 6th rank, supported with the rook on the 6th, black simply cannot win any of these positions. I had the same thing against Grandmaster De Fermin in one of my games, but that was after the Latia game. Then I finally realized, what it is about when you play in games like this. It's all about the 6th for the 3rd rank. And that's the key. I'm sorry to say, but neither... Caruana didn't give me any indication, to had any idea about all this. So he was just playing moves that seemed logical to him and let the game peter out to a draw. Rook h6. Now, we go beyond the area of guesswork, because to play this move, you can't just stumble upon this move accidentally. It's not some kind of a general grounds thing, The general grounds move would be rook h8, which we already saw loses the game. Rook h6, however, makes a draw. Now, it doesn't mean, however, that white would have saved the game. Because in this position, that's the move rook a2 that allows this brilliant defense with rook h6 and leads to a draw. In fact, there is a winning move. Shouldn't go rook a2. Okay, let me go over my analysis again. Yeah, king e3. Okay, remind you, e3 is impossible. Check. So you go with the king first. You can go to f3, it doesn't matter. Now, if you try to do the same, it just comes one tempo short. White is about to come out with the rook. But he can't. Okay, show me how to win this. No, I don't think, we can... Well, that's the whole thing. When you talk about time trouble, and the time trouble does, it prevents a very strong player from fighting things at the board. Let's extrapolate this thing to the opening. So suppose, you just have a very strong player with some kind of a reasonable understanding of the opening, but no particular knowledge. Then given a lot of time, hours or maybe days, he will be able to find most of the best theoretical moves, say on move 15, out of some reasonable opening position. But it still doesn't mean that he can do this in practical game, because he has to play that 15th move very quickly in modern chess. Otherwise, he would run out of time and energy. Same thing to the endgame. I know, given time, Giri and Caruana, they're great players. Obviously, they would have found this whole thing. But when you say, oh, they didn't find it because they didn't have time, no, well, yeah, but that's the reality. So therefore, they shouldn't be finding those things. They should be knowing those things before they get to play their next tournament, the candidates. Did you show me a win here? Ah, come on, people, it's staring you in the face, right? Haven't we seen this before? Now, secure their file and then queen. The reason it happened, because in this position, well, there was no... Well, there was no time to get the rook from h4. Yeah, it wasn't enough time to get the rook out. Suppose you do this and then here and then back. No, well, the same move, rook f4. Your rook had to be there on f6 and the pawn on h6, and there's simply not enough time in this line. But you realize there is not enough time once you know where to look. Like in this position, white goes h5, and actually the move rook h4 is the right move, because if you don't know this and you figure, okay, I can play king e1. You play king e1 here, then the game is going to be drawn. Simply because of rook e6 there and h6. So it's one of those positions that somehow I don't think it entered their minds as a basic factual knowledge of the endgame, because I don't see this being applied in the practical endgame that they had 2 days ago. Now, what was Caruana afraid of? Why didn't he play rook a3? Maybe he thought he simply cannot win any of these positions with one pawn each. And he felt that he absolutely had to take this pawn, which he did, and then it leads to a draw after rook a8. That's entirely possible. Rook c4 and rook c6. Yeah, that's exactly how it is. Alright, now. And here I come to the area which basically I'm not really sure. Well, I'm sure about what's right, what's wrong, but I'm not sure I need to criticize Giri that much for basically playing a losing move here. Rook a8 is a losing move. But I have to show you what I think about this position. Now, first of all, in order to understand this, we're going to look at the major alternative here that Caruana had, and I was shocked in the game that he didn't play it. And the alternative was to play h4. Now, h4 is the move that it basically screams to be played. And you don't play it because you calculated it all, or because it's some kind of a basic thing, that everybody studied. It's just one of those general ground moves moves based on general grounds that these guys are supposed to be very good at. It's simply squeezing the white king and then advancing the king and the pawn. And should white give up the h3 pawn as he did in the game, then the black pawn will be more advanced. Okay, so what to look at? Let's look at check, most forcing. King e4, right? Rook h8. Now you push the king back on the back rank. This is Rubinstein. What we studied before was not Rubinstein. Maybe it's just a recent addition to a basic theory of rook endgames. But this is your Rubinstein. Now, you push him always to the back rank with the king. So he goes over there and you do this. Well, there are clearly problems because checks, then the king comes to g3, you grab that pawn. You may be forced to exchange your e5 pawn, but you get the e4 pawn, you go 2 pawns up. But if white takes, then e4. And now white doesn't have the time to push the king away with checks, and I think he loses by force here. Rook h8, forward. You can't get in the front now. So you do this. Look, it's gonna be the same thing, but even much better because the a-pawns are present on the board. And there's hardly any big calculation required here. Everything else is just prosaic here. You go king d1 check and then you just queen. And you don't even have to worry about eventually giving up the rook on h8 because your king then can always grab the pawn on a4. It could be accomplished by simple move h4. Now, what if white waits, keeping that rook tied up? Now it's tricky. Check. Alright, you come up because you don't want to sit in the back. Now I gain a tempo. People, I just gained a whole tempo on the game. Now, obviously, this wins as well. But this wins, because I'm tempo up on the game. I played h4 for nothing. I can win this position anyhow now with simply advancing my pawns. The same move now wins. Resigns. All right. I can be a little critical of their lack of particular knowledge of that kind of obscure one pawn each and then the one Cura maneuver and the 6th rank with the rook and all that. If you don't know it, then you fear the resulting positions and you don't want to enter them because you don't have anything to rest your mind on. But not to play h4 in this position, advancing your pawns and pushing the king back to the 1st rank, this is known since Rubinstein. As Dalmatov said in his interview, these guys make mistakes we knew were mistakes 40 years ago. This is bad. Magnus? Yeah, on the defensive side, maybe, because he doesn't get the best... doesn't get in his best frame of mind when he has to defend, and he tends to not to quit, the wrong word, but not to give 100%. But Magnus always gives 100% when he's on a better side. Magnus wins those endgames. There is no way Magnus plays anything else but h4. And that's something for you, Caruana, to work on, aside of your openings and all that. Now, okay, so what happens in this case if he's thrown back to the back rank? Well, don't mess around. You already know you're winning there. Against the king on the back rank. What is there to worry about? King g3. King f1. King h3. Attacks the pawn. h3. Well, the pawn's queening, right? Lack of checking distance here. Rook check, king there. That's the game. Magnus is significantly better than other grandmasters, excluding Kramnik, because Kramnik was very good at that in those simple endgames. He's also pretty good in more complex endgames with more pieces on the board. But I think I see what huge gaps, in basic endgame knowledge, even in some of the very top players, but not in Magnus. Not in Magnus's games. Alright, so that's one of possible lines there, but h4 really had to be played. With that in mind, okay, Giri plays rook a8. h4 is coming at you. That is going to squeeze your king. You only have one move to play. Go king g3. Now, maybe in Giri's mind, it felt like going the wrong way. But it's simply a move that white had to play because it fights against black's main intention, which is to play h4. Now, if h4 is played in order to force this transition, that white gets this pawn fairly quickly, and the pawn will advance. Or else, it's going to be traded for the a5 pawn. Either way. Okay, the variations in support. Suppose I do this and you come, king g4? No, I can attack this pawn. I'll make a draw easily because the black king is going the wrong way. Alright, so h4 is probably not the move that would be played in the game. But what would be? On this one now, there is this move, and it's impossible for black to then win this pawn because he's going to get in that square thing. So he loses the h5 pawn without grabbing this pawn immediately. And an attempt to be active with the king and the e pawn is also thwarted because the pawn is simply pinned. It can't move forward. So suddenly white equalized the game in 2 moves. So it's no king e4. So what else? A check? No, well, now I can go forward. So it's not that, so it must be e4. Yeah, that's the last move we're gonna look at, e4. Now, a difficult move to play, but the move that white would have to find. Goes king over. Now, if black goes for this, and then advances his king, he's not going to be able to grab the h3 pawn. It's gone from there. That's an important part. And the white king can switch back and stay this way, in front of the pawn. So I go king f2, you go over there, takes, check. I don't see how black is gonna win this. There's no way. The last thing, if he goes this way, then the white king suddenly becomes active and it fights against the e-pawn. I mean, to fight the move king g3, you just have to simply realize, that black wants to play h4, and after that you're as good as dead. Now, why wasn't this played on this level? I really don't know. So the endgame offers us multifaceted material for study. The first thing, of course, we look at those positions with 2 pawns against 1, or maybe 1 pawn each, with passed pawns. And we discover the importance of the 6th rank and the Vancouver method, and how the attacker should not simple-mindedly keep his rook behind the opponent's pawn. He needs to attack from the side, because then he can create shelter for his own king. And all these things that helped me to win the game against Latia. And secondly, suddenly we're back on the very drawing board, like when you think about advancing your, not being afraid, rather, to sacrifice a pawn if you accomplish important things such as throwing the opponent's king to the 1st rank. Those things are 100 years old. Maybe my game with Latier is only 23 years old, and some other games in analysis that may be sort of a recent addition. But this stuff is all Rubinstein. Alright. Aronin and Karyakin have a great knowledge of endgames. Aronin doesn't have great knowledge of endgames. He's very, very talented, quick-minded. He can figure a lot of things at the board, but I analyzed a lot of games of Aronin, and he doesn't have it. That's one of the reasons why, he wasn't able to make this final step yet to the World Championship match. Karyakin I think Karyakin is better, and in this, and I think he's approaching where Kramnik was in his best days. But of course, with Karyakin's passive play, often, like he did today, when he at some moment played a series of passive moves and got soundly beat by Dingligen, so Karyakin has not yet overcome his problems of just the tendency to play too passively on the defense in more complex positions. But I think Karyakin's endgames are quite okay. I wouldn't worry about him. Alright, so it's basically today's talk, so once again, important points there, that h4 was the main threat, but once the game went into this territory, now the very instructive win here with the move rook a3 instead of, in this position, with the move rook a3. And by the way, if the pawn wasn't hanging there, then you might as well go rook d8 immediately. You just can't do it now because, you forgot to move your pawn forward. That's another compelling reason to play h4, by the way, Fabiano. Because your move e4 was not going anywhere away from you. You could always play it. h4. If he attacks, then you protect, and now you keep 2 extra pawns. Oh, well, anyway, I'm beating on a dead horse. Enough. Thank you guys for your attention. Yeah. Okay, let's watch more what's happening at YKNZ tournament. I'm glad Magnus got off the ground. With today's win, I feel a little bad for Luke Van Willy, made a horrible blunder. I don't know what the final position was. It seemed, to me, it seemed roughly balanced. 3 pawns for a piece, and Luke did quite a good job defending after the piece sacrifice, but it cost him too much time. So, anyway, I'll be watching together with you guys, and hopefully I'll get more material for my future shows. Thank you. Goodbye.